Hello, and welcome to another installment of the Weird Chronicles. Each episode, we bring you tales of action and adventure from Malifaux and the other side. The Nephilim are terrifying monsters who feed on blood and grow larger with every kill. But to the Nephilim, humans are vile intruders who are plundering a world that rightfully belongs to the Neverborn. I hope you enjoy Opposing Goals.
Opposing Goals by Bob Kosmeski. Niriamu's tiny horns repeatedly snagged in the hungry vines, impeding his progress towards the mother's shouting. The vegetation in this remote region craved blood, though the plants clinging to him tasted only disappointment. His skin was slick with black blood, equal parts his own and that of his young brethren. Gaining no nourishment from the ichor, the plants inevitably shrunk back from him, but the process repeated itself with each new copse. Once he was grown, he would be able to simply crash through the undergrowth. The smallest of his brood of tots, Niriamu held more violence and cruelty than most of his ilk. He craved maturation. His mind was obsessed with thoughts of hunting and killing. Even larger, stronger tots feared his fits of rage and the savage beatings they brought. He hated them. He hated everything but the mother. Secretly, he hated himself for being so small. Tonight's prey, another tot that Niriamu had deemed a cowardly embarrassment to their kind, had gained a reprieve when he had sensed the mother's anger intensifying somewhere nearby. He possessed a strong connection with her emotions, a sign that he was destined to become one of her greatest warriors. What had her so riled this night? He left his battered victim behind, intent on finding out. He ventured deep into the forest, moving amongst the collapsed ruins of a former temple. These ancient lands felt pure, undiscovered and untainted by the wretched human things. Thorny bushes had grown like a blanket over the dead temple. Niriamu crept slowly through it, undeterred. As Niriamu crawled closer, he felt Lilith's emotions intensify. Her displeasure grew, and her rage nearly overwhelmed his senses. Tonight her hatred burned like a fire within his mind. Niriamu stopped at the base of a ramshackle pillar where he could eavesdrop without being seen. Lilith was speaking to two women. One was beautiful and young, with blazing red hair, while the other was a grizzled, ancient-looking hag who was bent, drawing something in the dirt at her feet. Their presence concerned Niriamu. He did not trust them because she did not trust them. These three bickered constantly, and occasionally their quarrels turned physical. Tonight he could feel Lilith's wrath bordering on mania. His instincts told him a fight might be near. He listened intently, ready to spring to her side if necessary.
"Is a threat to us despite your pleasantries,"
Lilith chided.
"Do you really believe her to be an ally? A queen does not simply give up her throne."
Niriamu didn't hear the younger one's response, but her words further incensed the mother.
"No, we will not play nice,"
Lilith boomed.
"We are the rulers of this land. I will not be subjugated. And no matter how much you might need someone to rein in your madness, I will not allow you to be enslaved either. You often see schemes where they don't exist,"
the crone chided, her voice reminiscent of a croaking raven.
"It gives you an excuse for bloodshed. Still, there may be a plot here. The Titania of old was quite adept at masking her true intentions. Your sister should continue learning about her." Fine, Lilith huffed. As always, my children will face the danger head-on, while you waste our time playing games. I'm certain that no harm will come from allowing her to whisper empty promises in Nekima's ear. She pointed her sword at the other two. Mark my words. When this self-imposed queen incites a war, you will come to me and beg for my help. War. The word ignited Niriamu's passion for bloodshed. He envisioned standing by his mother's side, large and proud. He just needed to find the right prey to begin his transformation. Jackson watched shards of broken glass, dirt, and dust tumble along the floor in front of his broom. The slow, rhythmic motions of sweeping became meditation. It gave him something to focus on, other than his constant pain. "You're doing a heck of a job," Bess told him. "It ain't hard work," he replied. "Not compared to hunting fugitives out in the bayou or—" The words trailed off when he looked up and saw the disapproval on her face. He knew he was doing it again. "Sorry," he said. "I don't mean to keep living in the past." "I know you've been through a lot, Jackson, but you're a civilian now. That old life is over. You've got to try to move on." No longer focused on work, his attention returned to the throbbing in his arm and legs. The pain never relented, though he could sometimes dull it with the right mix of laudanum and distraction. Whenever his mind drifted back to his soldiering days, it seemed to get worse. Considering the time Jackson spent in a guild uniform comprised his best days, those memories never stayed quiet for long. Recollections of good times he spent with his friends in the guard, and the nightmares of the explosion resulted in daily agony. Bess came out from behind the bar and motioned for Jackson to sit. He sunk into one of the large, comfortable armchairs, grateful for the rest. "I'm sure it's not easy," Bess said softly, her tone sympathetic. "I can't even imagine what you're going through. But you're alive, when a lot of people didn't survive that night." As she continued, Jackson's mind replayed the events that trapped him in a broken body. Recalled sensations flickered through him, fragmented impressions of a chaotic and devastating night. Knocked down by the concussive blast that threw him to the ground. The feel of the flames burning his body as the Governor General's manor erupted into flames all around him, searing flesh and muscle. The sound of his own screams when a fallen ceiling beam pinned his legs to the ground. The sight of his blood flowing into a growing red pool. "We're all that's left. Got that?" Bess asked. Jackson nodded, his eyes distant. He knew the speech well enough to feign listening. Bess was his last remaining relative this side of the breach. She and Uncle Ray moved here shortly after he had. Ray spent their life savings on his business, looking to build as fine an inn as Malifaux has ever seen. Consumption claimed Ray just after he finished fixing the place up. Even with the passage of time, the building still maintained a regal look. Despite its elegance, however, very few patrons felt comfortable spending a night close to the quarantine zone. With few customers, Bess became desperate for scrip. Her luck improved after she turned the place into a high-class bordello. Now wealthy citizens of Malifaux came in for bourbon, cigars, and upscale working girls. After Jackson's injury and subsequent dismissal from active duty, Bess had asked him to move in. Too proud to take charity, he agreed to stay only if he could help with cleaning and occasional odd jobs. Jackson knew that giving up the room took a chunk out of Bess's earnings, but at least his presence meant she no longer had to do everything herself. No matter how much work he did, Jackson still felt like a societal blight. For most of his adult life, the guild was all he had known. He willingly risked his life, content in the knowledge that he was serving the common good, that he was protecting the people of Malifaux. When the doctor told him he was no longer fit to serve,
Jackson pleaded with her to reconsider. He volunteered to remove his arm and replace it with something hydraulic. He offered to work in a recruitment center or do paperwork. Anything to stay in service. Dr. Green explained that his injuries were too extensive. She said that the damage in Jackson's arm originated in his neck, which made limb replacement impossible. His arm shook even when he didn't get the spasms, which meant that any paperwork he filled out would be sloppy. As for recruiting, she asked him, who's going to join up when they're greeted by a broken-down soldier who reminds them of all the ways they could be injured in the line of duty? The guild unceremoniously dumped him, arguably the most painful part of the entire experience. His life's purpose wrenched away. He hid from the world and nursed wounds that would never heal. The damage wasn't just to his body, but to his mind. Jackson became nervous, particularly around loud noises. Whenever an overindulgent patron dropped a glass, the sound of shattering glass startled him and brought beads of sweat to his brow. Though he resented the doctor for her conclusion, he had to concur with her findings. He was too damaged to do anyone any good. As they spoke, Jackson noticed the dim light of a gas lantern coming through the window. Evening was upon them. Soon men would assemble in the lounge looking to satisfy their vices. Most nights Jackson continued his work, paying no attention to the carousing all around him. There was no point in retiring to his room until after things quieted down. The yells and cries echoing in the upper hall were too much for his broken psyche, regardless of their cause. He usually hung around in the lounge until after the men were gone, so that he could help Bess close the place for the night. Tonight, a dark mood left him anxious and needing to be alone. "Thanks, Bess. I appreciate the kind words. If you don't mind, I'm going to finish up and go out for a walk tonight. The doctor said moving around once in a while might keep my legs from getting worse." His aunt crossed the parlour room and peered out the window. "Looks like we've got a busy night ahead of us. Can you get back in time to help with closing? Sometimes the drunkards have a little trouble finding the front door." Jackson nodded, already becoming lost in another memory of the past. A short time later, while men and a handful of women made small talk with the working girls in the sitting room, Jackson slipped out the door. The smile that crossed Niriamu's thin lips contained no joy, only malevolence and brutal intent. His siblings spoke reverently of nights like this, boasting of moments in which Malifaux's natural elements conspired to promote violence. "Mine," he thought, as a single man limped away from a large, brightly lit house before entering a darkened alley. "My night." He followed the hobbled man into the back streets to study his prey. Niriamu thought of the creature as a sacrificial offering destined to help fulfill the Tot's ultimate purpose. Why else had it wandered alone into such a perfect hunting environment, if not to begin his ascension? The thing couldn't possibly see as well as Niriamu, especially with a thick fog cloaking the world in a swirling white veil. The gaslight lamps lining the street served as nothing more than dimly glowing globes. The mist consumed any light that dared spread too far from the source. The fog consumed not only the light, but noises as well, muting any sounds Niriamu might make. He moved as quickly as caution allowed, accidentally grazing the cobblestone alley with his metal hunting claws once or twice, though he doubted his prey noticed. The muffled acoustics undoubtedly drowned out his movements. When he finally killed the man, anyone nearby would have trouble pinpointing the location of the screams. No help would come this man's way. Niriamu followed along, searching for the best opportunity to attack. The predator within him ached to pounce on this easy prey, but inexperience worked against him. He felt unsure of how to attack or when to strike. Younger Nephilim usually hunted in packs, especially the Tots. Together they learned how to take down their quarry as a group. In hunting alone, he had expected his superior instincts to show him the way. When they didn't, he hesitated, and the pursuit dragged on longer than he had intended. The hunt intoxicated his bloodstream and bid him to stalk, but his mind never gave him the signal to attack. Jackson knew he was being followed. He dismissed the noises he heard at first, attributing it to one of countless vermin that crawled through the city's streets. Then the distinct sound of metal scraping on stone told him that this was something more dangerous. It's either a construct or someone dragging a weapon, he thought. He stopped occasionally to gauge his stalker's reaction. Each time, it stopped also, just as abruptly. When he resumed walking, he kept a slow pace and listened for more sounds. The stalker playing cat and mouse with him likely planned to ambush him. The former guardsman wasn't going to let that happen. Using himself as bait, he'd draw it out into a defensible location so that he'd be ready for it, rather than wait to be blindsided. As he walked along, he exaggerated his limp. Fresh sounds told him that his stalker was closing the distance. He wanted his enemy to think him easy prey. An overconfident foe made mistakes. Instinctively, he reached to unsnap his holster, forgetting that he no longer carried it or his trusty pistol. Fortunately, the broken bottles, crumbled stone blocks, and rusty pipes littering the alley could all be deadly enough in his trained hands. With weapons to spare, he prepared to draw his pursuer out a little bit and catch a glimpse of who he was up against. Feigning exhaustion, Jackson leaned back against a nearby wall. He took a lighter and cigar from the inside of his duster and spent an especially long time lighting the cigar. He used the motion to scan the alley, hoping to see where his pursuer was hiding. A flicker of orange light reflected back at him from a small pair of eyes crouched in the shadows of a nearby stairwell. He didn't see enough to know what he faced, but he now knew that it wasn't human, and he had its location. "Damn rats," he said, loudly enough for the creature to hear it. "If it's as smart as I think it is, it'll think it has me fooled," he thought. Neriamu didn't understand the words spoken by the human, but he was intimately familiar with the tone. This man-thing spoke with the same derision that the mother used in her rants against the humans. How dare it speak that way to him? It was the humans, those disgusting interlopers that had invaded Neriamu's world, not the other way around. Everything they touched became stained and eventually ruined. Mere parasites. They lived in cities they did not build, mined for ore that was not theirs, performed blasphemous rituals to raise the dead from their graves, and treated the Neverborn as if they were the outsiders. "And this one looks down on me." Rage surged through Neriamu's body. His breathing became shallow and quick, and his fists clenched around the metal hunting claws in each of his hands. The tot burst from the shadows and leapt at the man-thing. The horrible creature seemed to know he was coming, turning just in time to dodge the claws before they could dig into its midsection. Neriamu only scratched the man's side, but it was enough to make it howl with pain. Momentum carried the tot past his prey, and he sacrificed his footing to avoid sliding into the wall. He fell on his side, but managed to keep his eyes on his target. In the short time it took for him to jump up, the man grabbed something from the ground and threw it. A chunk of stone hit Neriamu in the forehead, knocking him back and sending him sprawling further down the alley. Black blood trickled down his skin into his eyes, blurring his vision. He could still see well enough to notice the man moving toward him, a broken bottle in hand. With a roar as large as his small lungs allowed, he bounded to his feet and dodged the attack, stabbing the human's limping leg with a claw. He was certain the horrible thing would crumple to the ground, where he could feast upon it and fulfill his destiny. When the man hit the ground, Neriamu saw an opening and pounced. To his surprise, the man had enough fight left in him to roll away from him and into the cover of a stone archway. Neriamu crashed down to the ground, landing where the human had been moments ago. The tot looked over, in time to see the man swing at him with the bottle. Thrusting his arm up just in time, Neriamu stopped the man's swing from slicing into his chest. The glass cut a deep gash in his arm, and the tot's black blood spurted out, splashing the man's face. Exquisite screams of agony told Neriamu that the human had suffered more from the attack than he had. Neriamu watched as the creature clawed at its face, disabled and helpless. The tot coiled his muscles to pounce again, certain of victory. The tot was mid-leap when the man simultaneously kicked out with the uninjured leg and swung wildly with the broken bottle. The kick sent the Nephilim sprawling backward, but not before glass ripped through his face, carving the flesh there into ribbons. Suddenly everything looked strange, devoid of dimension. A chill ran through him as he realized he no longer had a left eye. Despite his rage, despite his destiny, Neriamu pressed a hand to his ruined face and fled.
Good thing you ain't a talk,
Jackson joked, while Bess sewed his torn flesh back together. He took another spoonful of laudanum, convincing himself a higher dose could dull his senses to her indelicate ministrations. If you weren't a damn fool, you'd go to one, instead of having me stitch you up. And you'd tell the authorities what happened. His stomach churned at the idea. He envisioned his former colleagues, their eyes filled with pity at how far he'd fallen. Removed from active duty, and now unable to handle even a baby Nephilim by himself. It would erode any respect they may have held for him. Bess couldn't understand the feeling. He had to deter her with a different approach.
Do you want the guild poking around here, guarding the place, keeping tabs on your business?
Bess ran an above-board establishment, but like most merchants, she carried a certain amount of paranoia toward guild officials and their propensity to solicit bribes.
Even if they don't dig around your business, some of your patrons might not want to come around while they're patrolling the area.
And that thing out there? She asked. How dangerous will it be to my patrons? To you?
None at all,
he lied.
As bad as I look, I guarantee that I gave as good as I got. I'm pretty sure it crawled away somewhere to die.
What if you're wrong? What if it brings more of them back to this area?
I aim to check it out,
Jackson told her.
I couldn't see well last night. That damn black blood had to have left a trail, though. I'm going to track it down and find the body.
Don't play me for an old fool, she scolded. You want to prove yourself again. One of these days your pride is going to get you killed. Jackson exploded.
Damn it, Bess, you don't understand what it's like. This isn't pride, it's redemption. They can't toss me aside like a piece of trash. I have experience, knowledge. There are plenty of things I can still offer. I'll bring that thing's head straight to the guild brass myself. They'll have to reinstate me once I prove that I can still protect people.
An awkward silence fell across the room. Neither Jackson nor Bess would look the other in the eye. A knock at the door broke the quiet. Bess opened it and spoke briefly with someone in the hall. The visitor handed her something. When she turned back toward Jackson and closed the door, she handed him an old, well-used pistol and holster.
As soon as you came through the door all messed up last night, I knew you'd go after it, she told him. I've got a few people who owe me favours. Take this. Try not to get yourself killed.
Before he could thank her, she slipped out the door. Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't seem to expect to see him again. The depth of her concern and doubt made Jackson wonder if going after the thing might be a mistake. His drug-addled brain was too foggy to explore that hesitation, and eventually he drifted off into sleep. Niriamu woke on a cold, dirt cellar floor. He shivered, though a part of him realized it was not the chill ground causing it, nor was it pain. Suffering was something he knew. Every part of his body hurt, especially the gash that ruined his eye. Some wounds burned, some stabbed, some throbbed, and some ached. All of these aches were familiar, but they'd never made him shiver before. This new sensation felt alien and unwelcome. It made him feel even smaller than he really was. It also cast doubt about his visions of the future. Was he wrong about being destined to serve the Mother in greatness? Was he meant to die alone in this hole instead? Fear, he realized. It consumed his emotions and his thoughts. It was a disgusting, debilitating thing, and he instantly hated it. Even faced with unremitting agony, he knew that he could push through any physical pain. The fear, on the other hand, paralyzed him. He remained prone on the dirt floor for what seemed like hours. There was nothing to do but study this new emotion. Self-reflection gradually led him to recalling the mistakes he'd made the night before. He saw how his brash actions and violent rage exposed his weaknesses. He'd failed because he was reckless. Slowly, the epiphany set in. Fear was not an enemy. It was a powerful teacher. This epiphany brought clarity to his thoughts. His kin fought in packs, not out of frailty, but out of self-preservation that had been tempered by fear. With even a small amount of caution, the mistakes he made would never have happened. He had been so convinced of his invincibility that he had never considered the possibility that he might face defeat. Last night's failure hadn't ruined his destiny. It had guaranteed it. Just as claws and horns were his weapons, prudence now became his armor. With it, he wouldn't fall for simple trickery or be goaded into poorly executed attacks again. The light spilling into the cellar gradually darkened, and Niriamu knew that it would be twilight soon. The time for reflection was over. He stood and breathed in the cool air, feeling the agony of it against his face, and knew that his destiny would begin this night. The man-thing was out there, and it had to die. Jackson thought he knew what pain was. He had assumed the injuries inflicted by the explosion made him an expert. He had started to categorize the types he felt, tracked their frequency, and even began to anticipate how weather changes might affect his body. He had felt that his soul was imprisoned, trapped in a shattered body that prevented him from doing the things that his mind still thought possible. Waking up with his aching wounds and insufficient opiates in his system changed his perspective. His body no longer served as a prison. It became a torture chamber. His muscles, cells, and joints became shards of broken glass, pulsing through his veins and nerves. Fresh gashes and bruises seared with agony, exacerbating old wounds in the process. He suddenly wasn't sure if he had the strength to finish the job. Even his head betrayed him. The pressure at his temples threatened to split his skull at any moment. He suspected the headache came from the liberal doses of medication he'd taken earlier. Hair of the dog, he thought, taking more of the painkillers. He needed to be numb, at least enough to be mobile, just in case things turned against him. Though he did believe that the thing had died, he couldn't discount Bess's concerns that it might have attracted more Neverborn before passing away. Mobility, the revolver, and a soldier's situational awareness should win him the day. If the laudanum impaired his senses, he'd settled for 2 out of 3. All that mattered was proving to himself and to everyone else that he could kill the monster. He wanted to stop questioning who he was, what he was. He was a man, not some kind of subhuman creature able only to evoke pity. Staring out the window while waiting for the aches to subside, Jackson began to see shadows overtaking the city. It was past time to go. The waning light would make tracking more difficult. though his body rebelled against him, assaulting him with stiffness and discomfort. He set out to find the beast. With fresh air in his lungs and his body in motion, the laudanum finally started to work. He stumbled down the alley, though it wasn't clear whether his imbalance stemmed from the injuries or from the treatment. Probably both, he realized. Jackson chuckled a little. Course, if I do fail, at least I won't feel it too much. Drugged as he was, it didn't take long for Jackson to find the blood trail that he sought. No easy task given the shadows and grimy street. The tracks led to the area where last night's scuffle came to an end. Black blood stained the ground in wide swathes, making the trail much easier to follow. He continued, eyes fixed on the cobblestone street. Instinct told him that he should keep his eyes up to make sure he didn't walk into an ambush. But his jumbled brain, now obsessed with finding the monster, couldn't convince his body to comply. Rhythmic metallic noises echoed through the alley a short way ahead of where the bloodstains were thickest. Jackson recognized the sound, the creature's metal claw hooks scraping against stone. It made no effort to hide the noise this time. Even with better auditory conditions this evening, Jackson still struggled to pinpoint the sounds. He believed they came from one of the buildings up ahead, but they bounced too chaotically for him to definitively say so. The former guardsman fumbled with his holster, struggling to get the gun out. His mind and body didn't feel in sync. Coordination grew harder with every movement. He looked at the holster and discovered, with no small amount of embarrassment, that he'd forgotten to unsnap the weapon. It took him a few moments of struggling to free the revolver. When he finally had it in hand, he looked up just in time to see something scramble out of a nearby doorway and dart down the alley. He pulled the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, he hit the creature and it dropped. Elation provided enough stamina to run, however briefly, to claim his enemy's body. The thing at his feet was smaller than he recalled, and it held no blades. He poked at it with his boot until it rolled over. A cat's face stared up at him, twisted in confusion and pain, and the animal uttered a final weak mew before expiring. As he sharpened his claws on the stone basement wall, Niriamu marveled at how whole he felt. Physicality got him this far, but now, tempered with caution and self-preservation, his mind was working in cunning new ways. He knew exactly who and what he was, a warrior beast whose shadow grew larger than his tiny body, a soldier ready to serve at the mother's side in battle. Now he planned to introduce that warrior to the world. He heard the man-thing's clumsy approach, fortune again favouring him this night. Instead of outbidding his time and forcing Niriamu to enter its lair, the idiot beast had left its safety behind and once again come his way. Peering out of the broken cellar window, he watched the human fixating on the dried blood from the night before. The creature moved even more oddly than before, frequently losing its balance. Though it sometimes glanced his way, it somehow did not notice the tot staring back at him. Niriamu's lips cracked into a snarling smile. He almost pounced when the vermin began to reach for a gun. Last night's lesson stuck, though, and discretion held him back long enough to witness it firing wildly down the alley a few moments later. Niriamu crawled forth from the shadows, ready to strike. Temptation gnawed at him, trying to convince him to toy with the prey. He stifled that urge. This needed to be a quick kill. The man-thing gave no indication that it heard his approach. It simply stared down at some animal at its feet. The man was weeping, which surprised Niriamu. Humans were known to cry and beg for life when faced with death, but this one had no idea death was right behind him. Did it? Leery of another trick, Niriamu darted forward, digging one claw into the man's frail leg and the other into the hand holding the gun. The man fell forward, and Niriamu rode him to the ground. The tot landed on top of his prey and furiously slashed at the man's spine and skull. Hot blood tattooed his skin, creating a patchwork pattern of red and purple. He sunk his teeth deeply into the creature's open wounds and fed. Immense power surged through the Nephilim's body. Muscles exploded in growth, ushering in both pain and strength. His forehead split to accommodate expanding horns, and the tiny nodules on his back elongated and stretched into the large wings he was born to wear. Every chunk of flesh he tore from the man-thing brought instant evolution, violently morphing him from a small creature into a new, stronger hunter. He supped until his body had its fill, and then flew off into the night sky. Officer Carter made his way through the gore-lined home, trying to keep blood off his freshly polished boots. He approached the young recruit studying the scene. "Well, boys, what did you find?" Carter asked. "Some of the neighbors saw something stalking around in the shadows last night. Small, about the size of a dog. They heard screams a few minutes later." Carter's concern grew. "What happened next?" "Something flew past their window. From their description, it sounds like a second creature. It was much larger than the first." Carter rubbed his temples, dreading the answer to his next question. Just a few hours before, the proprietor of his favourite bordello had mentioned her wounded nephew chasing off after a baby Nephilim. He hadn't come home the night before, and she feared the worst.
"This creature. Did anyone mention it missing an eye?"
One of the men flipped open his pocket notebook, scanned the witness reports, and then nodded in confirmation.
"Telegraph your reports to Latigo."
Carter sighed.
"I'm guessing that one of the little Nephilim found a meal and got himself all grown up. Either way, this is out of our hands now."
That's it for another installment of the Weird Chronicles. Join us next time for more tales of action and adventure.